One day, the gentlest souls, the most sensitive hearts, become the most terrifying. The day an empath, who has always listened and understood, finally runs out of patience and allows the shadow within to rise. Have you ever given your love and compassion until you felt completely drained, only to realize that no one truly cared about your pain? If you have, you'll understand how much an empath endures and what could make them snap. In this video, we will explore the day the empath breaks and the terrifying shadow inside them awakens through the lens of Carl Jung. This is not just a psychological story, but also a warning about the power of a soul that has been suppressed for too long. When we think of empaths, we imagine kind, gentle people who always put others before themselves. They are souls so sensitive they can feel even the smallest shifts in someone else's emotions. But there is a truth few recognize. Even empaths have limits. And once those limits are crossed, what emerges is not weakness, but a force so raw and intense that it makes the world around them tremble. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For the empath, that darkness is everything they suppress, all the anger, the grief, the betrayals they quietly swallow. An empath is someone who feels deeply, often far more deeply than those around them. They carry a heightened sensitivity to the emotions of others, almost as if they have an open channel to the pain, the joy, and the hidden struggles of the people they meet. On the surface, this seems like a gift, a kind of superpower of compassion, but beneath it lies a heavy burden, one that Carl Jung himself would have described as both illuminating and dangerous. Empaths are often the ones who listen when no one else will, who absorb the emotions of friends, partners, or even strangers. They sacrifice their own peace to bring comfort to others. But this is not without cost. Each time they swallow their own frustration, each time they silence their own voice to maintain harmony, something builds inside of them. Layer upon layer, the unspoken anger, the ignored needs, and the small betrayals accumulate, press deeper into the unconscious. Jung would call this accumulation the shadow, the hidden counterpart of the self that grows stronger the more it is denied. Imagine a sponge placed in water. At first, it absorbs effortlessly, but when it reaches its limit, the water begins to spill out uncontrollably. The empath is that sponge. They absorb and absorb, often believing it is their duty, even their purpose. But no sponge can hold forever. And when it can no longer contain what has been forced into it, the release is sudden, powerful, and unstoppable. The danger for the empath is that they rarely recognize their own limits until it is too late. They live with the belief that enduring suffering is noble, that their worth is measured by how much pain they can carry for others, and society often reinforces this belief, praising them for their patience, their kindness, their willingness to put others first. But in truth, this endless endurance is not strength. It is slow self-destruction. Carl Jung warned that what is repressed does not disappear. It waits. It grows in silence. And when it finally emerges, it does so with a force that shocks not only those around us, but also ourselves. For the empath, this eruption is not just anger. It is the shadow, the part of them they never wanted to acknowledge, breaking through the walls they have built. Have you ever been in that position, where you gave so much, where you tolerated until you could no longer, and suddenly something inside of you snapped? Did it scare you? Did it surprise the people who always saw you as calm and gentle? If you have lived that moment, then you have touched the reality of the empath's shadow. There is a limit that every human being has. No matter how gentle, patient, or selfless an empath may be, they are not exempt from this truth. They can listen again and again. They can carry the weight of one person after another. They can sacrifice themselves so others may rest. But there comes a moment when endurance runs dry, when the heart grows weary, and when every mask of kindness begins to crack. That is the moment the empath breaks. This breaking is not like a passing fit of anger. It is an eruption that has been silently building for years. It is the sound of hundreds of dismissals, thousands of broken promises, countless moments of quiet humiliation and suppressed pain. When it rises, the shadow, what Jung described as the part of us that we deny, no longer remains hidden. It steps forward, raw and fierce, shaking the ground of every relationship and perception around it. Carl Jung once warned, "Whatever you resist persists, and whatever you refuse to confront returns as fate." For the empath, every silenced protest and every buried grief does not vanish. It waits. And when the waiting ends, it bursts forth with a force that not only shocks those around them, but often terrifies the empath themselves. Their words cut sharper, their boundaries are drawn harder, their actions strike with a clarity that feels cold to those who only ever saw them as endlessly patient. The one who once seemed as soft as a stream now moves like a flood, sweeping away pretense, exploitation, and manipulation. In that moment, people around them ask in disbelief, "How could you change so much? How could you become so cold, so ruthless?" But the truth is, they have not changed. They are simply revealing the part of themselves they were forced to hide. When the shadow awakens, it brings with it a primal strength, one they never knew they had, one that no longer allows them to be consumed. Picture a lion locked too long in a cage. The day its bars are opened, it does not step out as a docile pet. It roars, it leaps, it claims back its space. The empath is the same. When their shadow is released, they no longer remain the listener, the caretaker, the one who bends endlessly. They become the person who can say no, who draws lines that cannot be crossed, who is willing to sever ties with those who bleed them dry. This may appear frightening, but it is also necessary. Without that breaking, the empath would remain in the endless cycle of giving and depletion. Without the awakening of the shadow, there can be no integration, no real selfhood. Jung often reminded us, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Sometimes the eruption itself is life's way of forcing the empath to finally face their own darkness. But this leaves us with a profound question. Once the shadow has erupted, once the storm has passed, where does the empath go next? Do they become bitter, closed off, unwilling to trust again? Or do they learn to integrate this shadow, to use its power not for destruction, but for protection, balance, and strength? Have you ever lived through such a breaking point yourself, a moment where you snapped so suddenly that even you did not recognize who you were? Did it frighten you or liberate you? And how did those around you respond, with fear or with respect for finally seeing your strength? If you have lived through this, you have touched the reality of the empath's shadow. To truly understand the breaking of an empath, it is not enough to speak only in theory. We must see how it unfolds in everyday life, in the familiar settings of family, love, work, and friendship. These stories are not distant myths. They are lived realities that many of us may recognize within ourselves or in those around us. Example 1. Within the family picture, a daughter who has always been the quiet one, the peacemaker. Whenever arguments erupt at home, she silences her own feelings to soothe the anger of others. She listens endlessly, carries responsibilities not meant for her, and takes on the pain of her parents, siblings, everyone. For years, she endures, believing that her worth lies in keeping the family together. But then one day, during yet another argument where her needs are ignored, she erupts. The shadow within her rises, and instead of calming everyone, she shouts. She refuses. She walks away. The family is stunned. She's never spoken like this before, but in truth, she has simply revealed the side of herself they never allowed her to show. Example 2. In love and relationships. Creating healthy boundaries. Empaths often believe that endless giving is their duty, but true healing means learning to say no when necessary. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are protection. They ensure that an empath's energy is not endlessly drained, but preserved for what truly matters. With boundaries, the empath learns to give from wholeness, not depletion. Boundaries become the shield that prevents exploitation and allows them to remain balanced. Transforming anger into strength. Anger has long been labeled as negative, but in truth, it is raw energy. When ignored, it destroys. When acknowledged, it can be transformed into a driving force, the courage to act, the fire to create change, the shield to defend what is sacred. For the empath, embracing their anger without letting it consume them is the key to turning shadow into strength. Listening to body and soul. Healing. The shadow is not only a task of the mind, it is a process of caring for the whole being. When the body is tired, it must rest. When the soul is restless, it must be soothed. Practices such as meditation, journaling, walking in nature, or speaking openly with trusted friends can all bring light into forgotten corners of the psyche. Each small act of care is a thread weaving the shadow back into the whole self. Learning to love the darkness. 2. Perhaps the most profound step of all is to realize that the shadow is not an enemy. It is part of you, a part that has been left in exile, waiting to be acknowledged. When you learn to love not only your light, but also your darkness, you become whole. And from wholeness arises true power. The power of integration, of balance, of no longer being divided against yourself. So the path of healing is not about eliminating the shadow, it is about integrating it. An empath who embraces their shadow will no longer be consumed by it. Instead, they become someone both gentle and strong, someone who can listen deeply but also stand firmly, someone who can give with love while also guarding their own soul. Have you ever tried to face your own shadow? Have you sat down and named the wounds, the anger, the desires you once denied? If you have, share your experience in the comments. Your story may give courage to someone still lost in their darkness. And remember to subscribe to this channel so you won't miss the next video, where we will go deeper into practical shadow work exercises designed specifically for empaths, step by step, showing you how to transform darkness into light and pain into healing. Consider the partner who gives everything in a relationship. They forgive betrayal, they excuse neglect, they pour love into a heart that never reciprocates. Their empathy becomes their prison, and their patience their slow destruction. But then, one day, a line is crossed. The shadow awakens, and the partner who once endured quietly now speaks with fire. They pack their things, they leave without looking back, and the one who took them for granted finally sees the storm that patience has birthed. The empath's breaking is not just a departure, it is the reclaiming of dignity that was buried under years of silence. Example 3. In the workplace. Think of an employee who always takes on extra work. Their colleagues rely on them because they never say no. They stay late, fix mistakes, absorb criticism, and smile while doing it. For years, management praises their dedication while quietly exploiting their willingness to endure. But then, one morning, after yet another unreasonable demand, they snap. They refuse the task. They confront their boss. Their colleagues are shocked. "You've always been so agreeable. But this is the shadow breaking through. Not cruelty, but the raw assertion of a self that can no longer be erased. Example 4. In friendship. Imagine the friend who is always there at midnight, answering the phone, listening to endless complaints, offering comfort again and again. They rarely speak of their own struggles because they believe their role is to carry others. But one day, when a friend dismisses their pain or mocks their exhaustion, they withdraw completely. Calls go unanswered. Messages are ignored. The once ever-present friend disappears into silence. Others may call it cold or unkind, but in truth, it is the empath's shadow saying, "Enough." These are the moments when the world sees the empath differently. No longer the quiet caretaker, no longer the endless listener. Instead, they reveal the shadow, the suppressed part that demands respect, dignity, and boundaries. Carl Jung reminded us that the shadow is not inherently evil. It is power, raw and unshaped. When ignored, it erupts destructively. But when acknowledged, it becomes the strength that protects the empath from further harm. Have you witnessed this in your own life? In your family, your relationships, your work, or your friendships? Have you seen the moment an empath could no longer endure, and the shadow within them awakened? If so, share your story in the comments. Your experience may give others the courage to recognize their own breaking point, and to see it not as shame, but as the beginning of transformation. The path of healing and the power of shadow work. When an empath breaks, when the shadow bursts through and floods the surface, it is not the end of their story. It is the beginning of a new journey, the journey of healing and rebirth. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For the empath, healing does not mean running from the shadow, but learning to face it, befriend it, and integrate it into their life. This is the essence of shadow work. Facing rather than denying. The first step for the empath is to dare to look directly at their darkness. The shadow is not only anger or resentment, it also holds repressed desires, unacknowledged needs, forgotten strengths. Each time we deny these parts, we give them more power in the unconscious. But when we are willing to sit with them, name them, and bring them into awareness, the shadow softens. What once terrified us becomes something familiar, something we can work with.